Hello, everyone. Bill Molyneux here with Goober the Traveling Bear, and we are at the Maryland Veterans Museum with historian Mr. Nell. And Mr. Nell, what are we going to learn about today?
Well, we're going to talk about the old Gatling gun that was the brainchild of Dr. Richard Jordan Gatling. Interesting history about it is, unlike other weapons designers like Hiram Maxim, who developed guns to make a huge profit from war, one day Richard Gatling was visiting a Union hospital, and he noted out of 3 casualties out of 10, the soldiers there were injured from gunfire or shrapnel from artillery blast, while the vast majority of them perished from disease and infections. So he thought of, well, if I invent something that causes horrific casualties, maybe it will reduce the size of a standing army, and possibly with a high casualty rate, it'll make war more improbable. And that's not really a new notion. Same thing was said about on the invention of the crossbow hundreds of years prior to that. Well, here's Dr. Gatling's picture right here.
All right. I'm going to move my camera up.
Okay.
Okay, I got him in focus.
Okay, well, that's that's Dr. Gatling right there. And he is a physician. He trained as a physician, but he never really practiced medicine. And so in 1862, he patented his Gatling gun, the rotary cannon. The Army never really took to it at all. In fact, the Gatling gun really isn't the first machine gun, if you want to say that, machine gun. In fact, the first, if you want to say machine gun, was this contraption. Let me blow it up some.
All right.
Oops, too much.
I got it blown up on my screen. There we go.
This is the first truly hand crank machine gun. It was jokingly called a coffee mill machine gun. It had the same principles as the Gatling gun. You had these cylinders like a revolver, and right here was a hopper where you fed bullets on top and fell into the chambers. Now, unlike the Gatling gun, all chambers, all the rounds fired through one single barrel. Well, the downside of it was the firing hundreds of rounds a minute, and the barrel tended to overheat, causing jamming. But the military did take a limited interest in it. Did take a limited interest on the coffee mill gun.
Now, was that ever tried out in combat or just?
It was tried out in combat on a limited basis. And it was actually called the Agar coffee. It was known as the Agar coffee mill machine gun.
Well, that's pretty cool.
So, in 1862, and Richard Gatling put a patent on his Gatling gun. It's fed right up here. Instead of a hopper, there's a magazine well right up here, and it's fed with this long 40-round stick magazine. Now, it's not like a modern magazine where it has a spring in it. It's basically gravity fed. And when the assistant gunner would put the magazine here, and he will loosen something on the magazine, and then the rounds will drop into the chambers.
Okay.
Unlike the Agar coffee mill gun, each barrel has its own firing mechanism. Like the coffee mill gun, there's a hand crank here.
Hold on, I'm going to pause the camera and come on the other side.
Okay.
All right, continue, Mr. Nell.
All right, like the coffee mill gun, there is a hand crank here, and the gunner will turn the crank to fire the weapon, and then each barrel will rotate. Now, again, each one has its own firing mechanism. So, unlike the coffee mill gun, the Gatling guns range from 4 upwards up to 10 barrels. So they would usually fire at this position here on this. One of the barrels would fire in this, like almost like in the 7 o'clock position here.
Okay.
And so it was usually had a crew of 4. The United States Army really did not take a liking to it at all. In fact, it only saw limited service basically in the last closing months of the war, where a number of Union generals out of their own pocket bought a number of Gatling guns for their troops to use, and they were used with success in the Battle of Petersburg, Virginia.
Okay.
And then I can show you
All right. I'm going to move my camera over there.
Okay.
Okay, we moved our camera, Mr. Nell. What's this?
Okay, this is one of the magazines I told you about. They had different feed systems. This is one of the different magazines. There's looked like a standard modern magazine. Oh, again, they had no spring on it, like what you see in today's weapons.
Okay.
And like I said, the assistant gunner will drop it on top of the magazine well, and there's this little hatch, like a latch device here. So he'll pull that thing. They'll pull that latch, and it will drop the magazines.
Okay.
Into the chamber. Let me show you another feed mechanism that the Gatling used.
So what's this one, Mr. Nell?
Okay, the United States Army didn't officially adopt the Gatling gun until a year after the war between the states was over. And this is one of the other feed devices here that Gatling used. It's called a Bruce feed system. It looks like a standard magazine, but it kind of acts like a stripper clip. What it did was the assistant, while the gunner is turning the crank to fire the gun, you can have assistant gunners with 20-round boxes of 20-round boxes of ammunition. They would continuously feed this magazine here. Unlike the regular box magazines where they have, once it's empty, the assistant gunner has to take it out. This allowed continuous firing by one of the assistant gunners feeding rounds into that feed system.
Wow. Now, a quick question on the magazines. I have a French Foreign Legionnaire miniature Gatling gun, and it's got a canister on top.
I will show you that. I will get to that. I will get to that.
Well, Mr. Now, you are super prepared.
Well, again, as the years go by, there were new feed systems developed. This was one of them that came about during the 1870s. It's known as the Broadwell magazine. It's kind of like a big cylinder that sits on top of the Gatling gun's feed system. Each column here, there's like 16 columns. Each column held 15 rounds. So what they did was when the gunner is firing, the assistant gunner has to almost like take count of how many rounds he's fired. And then when the 15 is used up, he has to physically turn that magazine so that way the next column will feed in more rounds into the Gatling gun's hopper.
Wow. So if the gunner is turning the crank and you got another person there's a lot going on in this gun crew.
So you got a gunner turning the crank, and then you have an assistant gunner. Once he has to pay attention, so once those 15 rounds is done, he has to physically turn the magazine. The Broadwell magazine the Gatling guns were used basically by naval units, used by the Navy. And let me show you another feed system here.
All right, Mr. Now, what's this one?
Okay, on the 1880s, early 1880s, another new feed system was introduced. This was called, if I pronounce it right, the Accles magazine, ACCLES. I don't know exactly how many rounds it held, but it's like a pan, donut-shaped magazine that fits on top of the Gatling gun. This magazine was more secure than the Broadwell magazine. The Broadwell magazine had limitations where if the gun was at a certain angle, it could cause misfeeds, whereas the Accles magazine was more secure. This is more related to the modern drum magazines you see, like on Soviet-style RPK machine guns, or the old Lewis magazines with drum magazines. And while the gunner is turning that crank, there was a mechanism that also fed and the drop rounds into the chambers.
Wow. What caliber are these Gatling guns?
It varies. Like for example, this model.
Okay, this model. I got it
Okay.
in sight now.
Okay, the calibers vary. Like for example, I believe this model here is 58 caliber. Some models from the 1870s that the U.S. Army used were 45-70. Now, when Richard Gatling sold the patent rights of the Gatling to Colt, Colt had sold a number of their Gatling guns to customers overseas, especially Great Britain. In Great Britain, the caliber they used was known as a 45 boxer round. And I can show you a picture of what the British Gatling guns look like.
All right, I'm going to pause the camera here. So this is a British unit?
This is a British unit circa the Zulu Wars in modern South Africa. You can see it using the Broadwell magazine. So this is probably from a Royal Navy unit. And this was used with high success rate during the Zulu Wars of 1879. The first time the British had used their Gatling guns was in a campaign known as Isla where there was a defeat for the British forces. Roughly around 4 July 1879, in the Battle of Ulundi, the British forces had deployed 10 pieces of artillery and 2 Gatling guns manned by, I believe, a Royal Navy gun crew. And the Gatling guns and the artillery units firing canister rounds played a key role in the British defeating the Zulu warriors in the Battle of Ulundi in 4 July 1879. And then there was a force of roughly 4,200 British forces with 1,000 African auxiliaries up against a 15,000 force of Zulu warriors, but this division size, whereas the British had roughly 2 brigades.
Wow. All right, I'll pause our camera here. We get reorganized. What's this one, Mr. Nell?
Well, it's the same Gatling gun with the Ackley's rotary magazine. Around the 1880s, around 1885, an American inventor, Hiram Stephen Maxim had invented his belt-fed water-cooled machine gun that's recoil operated. That pretty much started the death knell for the Gatling gun. In around 1893 or so, with the Gatling gun now competing with Hiram Maxim's Maxim machine gun, they said, well, we need to do something to make it more marketable. There was an early attempt to put an electric motor on the Gatling gun in 1893. Didn't turn out to be too successful. It wasn't a very successful attempt because of the feed issues from the magazine. There was feed issues on the magazine causing a lot of jams.
Okay. So, Mr. Now, I've seen a lot of war movies with these, and sometimes they seem to jam and get overrun by the native warriors. Can you tell me a little bit about the jamming issues?
Well, when the early the early Gatling guns came about, they were using paper cartridges. The Gatling gun was invented before the invention of the universal metallic cartridge, today like we know as a modern rifle round or pistol round. The paper cartridges were not sufficient. They were the wrong type to use until the universal metallic cartridge. A lot of the jams also came from, sometimes it may have been inappropriate quality control on the rounds, and sometimes the wrong calibers were put in. The United States Army had various calibers, and it was like a nightmare for the quartermaster and logistics officer to straighten out which one is which caliber is used to fire which round. Do I use the 45-70 in the carbine, or can I use the 45-70 on the Gatling gun? It took a while for the United States Army to find standardized, look, we need a round to fire for both Gatling guns and rifles. A lot of it could be from logistics issues.
I have to ask this as I'm working on a Custer's Last Stand game. If General Custer had taken those two Gatling guns he left behind, do you think he could have survived the Battle of Little Bighorn?
Some historians say that's a possibility because he decided to leave. From what I understand, he decided to leave the Gatling guns behind. He wanted his command to be more mobile, so they just opted to use the single-shot Sharps carbines. Well, the trouble is that they were already outdated by the time the Battle of Little Bighorn came about. You already had lever-action rifles that held 12 to 14 rounds, and it's a matter of cocking the rifle and squeezing the trigger. Whereas the Sharps carbine, you have to reload the rifle for every single round you fired.
Wow. I'm going to pause here. What's this, Mr. Nell?
Well, so an old saying, well, what goes around comes around, you know. And the coffee maker gun has never really went away. During the Korean War, the F-86's 50 caliber, 650 calibers were seen as not effective enough to down the Soviet MiG-15s. So they said, well, let's take a couple of F-86s and upgun them with 420 millimeter cannons. And so what they did, they took that revolver technology from the coffee maker gun and put it on these M39 20 millimeter auto cannons. Rotary, they're known as rotary cannons. The same principle as the coffee maker gun, where you have a cylinder that looks like a revolver or a pistol. Instead of a hopper, you have these ammunition feed trays, and it feeds into these hoppers in here into the chamber, and then just like the Gatling gun, it's rotating at a high rate of speed, but it's coming out of instead of firing all 6 barrels, it's only coming out of 1 barrel.
Wow. Now, how about in the movie Predator?
That's a Gatling gun.
Now, is that
That's a rotary gun?
A rotary gun.
Okay.
Now, does the Gatling family get royalties when they produce that, or is that long gone?
I don't know about that. Let me show you another modern revolver cannon.
Okay.
Okay. Whoops.
I got it. I see the chamber there.
Okay. Here is a better view. You can see the rotary. You can see the revolver chamber.
Yep.
That's no different than the 1860 coffee maker gun used during the early outbreak of the Civil War. It hasn't. The revolver cannon hasn't really gone away. Mainly, a lot of European forces like to use this system. They like the revolver cannon because it's more accurate and it's not it's not as mechanically demanding as the rotary cannon.
Okay.
The downside to that, and now I'll let me show you the modern Gatling gun.
All right, Mr. Nell, what's this one?
Now here is, like I just spoke earlier about the revolver cannon not going away. Well, the Gatling gun hasn't gone away. Well, after the success of what they saw the 20 millimeter revolver cannons did in Korea, they said, well, let's upgun to a 20 millimeter Gatling gun. So they pretty much, General Electric dug out the blueprints of not only the Gatling gun, but the electric-powered Gatling gun of 1893. Well, this is not a 20 millimeter version, but this is fact. This is the Dillon Arrow M134 minigun. Same principle as the Gatling rotary gun. Electric motor, has a rate of fire of 6,000 rounds a minute. There's some discussions of the Europeans like the revolver cannon because they like its accuracy. It is not as mechanically demanding. However, we have 6 barrels, like for example in this minigun or its 20 millimeter bigger brother. It has a higher rate of fire. They can fire a longer sustained burst, whereas the revolver cannon can only fire a short burst because firing from a single barrel causing overheating.
All right, I'll pause here. What's this one, Mr. Nell?
Well, this is not the largest Gatling gun ever made, but one of the largest one. This is the modern GAU 8 or GAU 8 30 millimeter Gatling gun. In fact, Republic Fairchild built an aircraft around it known as the A-10 Thunderbolt II. This is used basically to destroying armored vehicles at close range by the A-10, providing it to close air support.
What's the nickname for that plane?
The Warthog, and sometimes it's known as Thunderbolt II,
And
named from the P-47 Thunderbolt for World War II.
and I have a squadron of them 4 miles from my house in Baltimore. Very cool. We're sure learning a lot about Gatling guns. Let me pause here and we'll do our closeout. Well, Mr. Nell, this was fantastic. Goober learned a lot. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about the Maryland Veterans Museum here?
Well, we're open every day from noontime to 4. Please visit us. We'd love to have you over. Check out all our exhibits. And we have ambassadors here. If you need have somebody tell you some stories about certain topics, we're more than happy to give you a story.
All right. And Goober and I want to say thank you for all the videos you and Connie, your wife, have done with me to help promote history. Everyone out there, please stay safe, be kind, and be courteous. Thank you for watching.